So I think we can start. Welcome once again to the eCommemoration Convention 2024, and we're going to start right now with the first panel on the topic of virtual environments, experiencing historical landscapes in open world games. And we have two absolute experts in the field here today, and I'd like to start first with Deborah Papiernik. She's with Ubisoft, the French video game developer and producer. I think everybody knows the name. Everybody knows a lot of games, probably, of Ubisoft. You've been there with 25 years now, I think, and the last 8 years she has been and still is SVP for New Business and Strategic Alliances, looking beyond the world of sheer video gaming and connecting, building bridges between different industries such as health, mobility, and culture. Deborah, it's an honor to have you here today.
Thank you.
And to my left is Dr. Marc Bonner. Dr. Marc Bonner is a researcher in game studies and media studies who has led the research project Open World Structures, Architecture, City and Natural Landscape, as well as Eco-Critical Implications in Computer Games. Funded, yes, that sounds complex, it is, funded by the German Research Foundation, the DFG, which culminated last year in the publication of an 820 strong page monograph called Open World Structures, offene Weltstrukturen, Architecture, City and Natural Landscapes in Computer Games, and was published in Büchner Verlag, I think, yes. Marc, thank you so much for being here as well. And, my name is Nora Beyer. I'm a video game journalist, writing about, games culture, primarily for media outlets such as Der Spiegel, Deutschlandfunk Kultur, Der Freitag, and others. And I have the honor today to accompany this panel. And let's get started. But before we dive into discussion, we would like to start with a small visualization exercise or experience. We have a Mentimeter for this. And I would like to ask you the questions that, or give you the exercise that you think of a digitally rendered environment right now that immersed you into a historical setting. If you like, you can close your eyes. Maybe, remember some video game maybe you played or some digital experience you had which immersed you into a historical digital setting and which, impacted you in a profound way. So maybe you galloped across the Wild West on your trusty horse in Red Dead Redemption 2, if anybody knows the game, or you strolled down the roads in pre-revolutionary Paris in Assassin's Creed, Unity, or any other experience you have. So I think you can start up with a Mentimeter you had on your mobile device right now. And there should be the question. You can just type in your answer. So you can just type in your experience. Does it work? Okay, just takes a second, I guess. Any experience you had or anything you can think of. Maybe it doesn't have to be an open world game, it may be some kind of digital experience you had, any setting, and you remember and be like, wow, that was just really interesting for me to experience. That was just really, that just shaped the kind of maybe idea I had of history in digital spaces. There you are. Right. Okay, cool. There's a lot of answers right now already. Okay, we'll get back to that in the very end, and we'll have a look at our collective memories we're collecting right now via Mentimeter. And, I'd like to start with you, Deborah. Of which memory did you just think?
I thought about Assassin's Creed just because it's kind of like magnetic, even if you're not a gamer, when you see the landscapes. And it can be Greece, it can be ancient Egypt, it can be a more recent setting. It's really magnetic. And at the same time, I'm not a gamer. I've been at Ubisoft for more than 25 years, and I still can't play, like get lost in 3D. But I love the industry. And but what had an impact on me was when I first tried VR, actually, and my first experience was, it was just a prototype where I had the headset and suddenly I was in the mountain with a fire next to me, nighttime, I see a plane crash next to me and I hear a voice and the sound of an helicopter that says, hold on, we'll be with you in 5 minutes. So I understand I have to survive. And suddenly the wolves are attacking. So I have just to fight against the wolf. So I fight against the wolf. I move a lot. I'm very hot. I want the fire to just be turned off because I'm hot. And then there is this wolf that is beautiful with these blue eyes. So once he's down, I want to touch the wolf. That does not exist, okay? That other one surprised me because he attacked me and I was very surprised. So once he was down, I kicked him. Still didn't exist. It was in Montreal, and a couple hours later, I was in Montreal. I was like on my phone, walking at the same time, running late. It was night, it was cold. It was in February, Montreal. And then suddenly, a pack of snow just fell from a roof next to me. And I went like this, I was like, where are the wolves? And I was like, wow, what an impact. It was just an experience I had lived, and it was kind of like a game, but it was more than that. So I suddenly understood the power of VR in terms of immersion, even for non-gamers, that if it works on me, it can work on pretty much anyone. And that's how I started developing other things at Ubisoft beyond just games.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, the theme of the panel this year is, the theme of the convention this year is Spaces of the Past, right? And this panel is about the impact of historical landscapes in open world games. And Marc, now the question to you. You wrote that 820 long book, Offene Weltstrukturen, open world games, though you are the expert in the field definitely, which was released last year, as I already mentioned. And you defined well, spaces and digital games, meaning architecture, urban landscapes, and natural landscapes, and how they impact players, and how those landscapes structure gamer experiences. What are your key findings?
Well,
and I think we've got pictures for that.
The one thing I would like to say prior to the next answers is that in researching open world games, you of course have to have a lot of time, not only because these games mostly take your time between 15 and maybe 150 hours of play, but you also have, if you're like me and you research on a transdisciplinary approach, you have to read a lot of stuff from cultural geography, from art history, from history, from game design, from media studies, and things like this. And the interesting thing now, why I chose the open world games to study, is that for the first time, these kind of games try to give you the possibility to choose your own path within the game world. So it's not only about missions you have to fulfill, not only quests you have to take, but it's also about the game world itself, about the landscape itself. So one could say that open world games, or playing open world games, is mostly about experiencing landscape as an end in itself. So it's about the city that is staged, or the landscape that is staged. And with this in mind, it's really interesting to go back in art history and look into Romanticism and landscape paintings, and especially with things like Caspar David Friedrich or the Hudson River School in the US. And when you look at something like Der Wanderer über dem Nebelmeer, you of course have this idea of longing for getting down into this valley, or for the longing going up the next hill you can see on the horizon, right? And you have this back figure of the wanderer, but that's it. So that's the suspension you get while viewing this painting. And with open world games, you are actually in the power, you are empowered to do this thing. You can go down the valley, you can climb up the next mountain, and of course you can see what the avatar is seeing, because you're not only controlling the avatar, you're also controlling the virtual camera around it. And of course, open world games play a lot with the idea of romanticism and romanticist landscape ideas, and with that also with a really evocative idea of how landscape is structured, because also like Caspar David Friedrich, he just sketched things from original landscapes and then he put them together in his paintings, so they are ideal landscapes, so to speak, based on original landscapes. And that's the same thing with these open world games. And with this, the idea of landscape, what is landscape, that was a thing that really interested me, and what is the idea of a horizon as a cultural concept, and what is the idea of worldness, what is the idea of wilderness, came to my mind, and there was a big, there are a lot of discourses for this coming from philosophy, coming from cultural geography, coming from spatial theory and things like this. And the idea of exploring a landscape and going from horizon to horizon, because the horizon never ends, right? The Earth is a ball, a globe, and when you are on your track, the horizon will ever change, and it will be ever at this point where the sky and the Earth will meet. And this was a really interesting thing for me to look into, because, of course, there were a lot of people back in the days in the older world, in Europe, that wanted to go to the US or to North America back in the days, because it was this world that meant freedom, that meant unspoiled landscapes. Of course, that was not true, you know, because of all the indigenous people already living there and already cultivating all these lands. But after Christoph Columbus was there, all these plagues killed a lot of them, so mostly, I think, 80% of the population. But that said, the idea of structuring these landscapes is with staggering horizons. And as you can see with this example, Horizon Zero Dawn, it's already in the name there. You can see that they play a lot with these undulating landscapes. You have a lot of valleys, you have a lot of mountain ridges and hilltops. And with the newer games, so starting from around 2017, they also play a lot with lighting, they play with volumetric cloud generation, and also with these mist that is going through these hilltops and through the valleys, so that they also play with things like sfumato and try to design a plastic idea of landscape you can go down into. And if you look at a world map for the second Horizon game, for example, you have this traditional idea of starting in the west in a small, shallow mountain valley, and you would go into a more open area and then end at the Pacific coastline, because you start somewhere in Utah and then you would go to California. And as you can see with the red lines I made there and the circles, they try to show you the mountain ridges that are staggered on your way from west to east. So the really classic track the colonialists would go in the US, right? And this is the most basic idea of open world games, that you always have a possibility horizon like a colonialist or would have, or like a trapper or things like this. So there's a lot of patterns or courses of action you have to do that would be anchored with colonialism and imperialism. Even if the story in the game world says you are the stranger in a strange world and you have to rescue all the local people or indigenous people in order to free them from an oppression there. But it's still imperialistic and colonialistic courses of action. And this is also embodied within the landscape by these staggered horizons, you know. I will skip that. And one interesting thing also is that these open world games give you a complete area, a non-linear area at hand to play with. There may be level gating, there may be story gating, so that you can only go in certain parts when you take on a specific quest. But most of the time, they try to design the landscapes in a way where you can see a lot of interesting things, points of interest from one specific mountain or one specific hilltop, so that it doesn't depend on where you are in the game world. You always will see a lot of geological formations or towers or things like this that would pique your interest and would urge you to go there. And that's also the main thing for open world games. You have two big parts in there. You have the part where the story arc is, where the quests are, the missions, which the game designers try to to design in a way that they also stage an urgency in the things you have to do, like freeing people, like fighting a specific thing, like preventing a catastrophe. And the other part is, so to speak, besides this episodic time of quests, the seamless time or free time of just experiencing landscape, just experiencing nature, maybe finding places the designers put there but are not in context of any mission or quest you have to fulfill, so that you can generate your own systems of meanings or your own contexts within these game worlds, so that you have an individual experience of this game world. And this is a thing that the open world games would differentiate from the more linear type of games. And of course, they use a lot of iconic science systems to mediate these points of interest. I will just only highlight two. One is the tower, and the other one would be something like a smoke column, which would be a sign for an enemy camp, for a bandit camp or a fortification. You have to infiltrate or you have to attack. So I would quote this one thing from W.J.T. Mitchell, who says, I quote, "Landscape is a natural scene mediated by culture. It is both a represented and presented space, both a signifier and a signified, both a frame and what the frame contains, both a real place and its simulacrum, both a package and a commodity inside the package. Like imperialism itself, landscape is an object of nostalgia in a post-colonial and postmodern era, reflecting a time when metropolitan cultures could imagine their destiny in an unbounded prospect of endless appropriation and conquest." So this idea we perform in open world games is the very specific point in landscape theory or cultural geography, so to speak, and post-colonialism discourses. And of course, this is not only a thing for the natural landscapes we can see, but also for the urban landscapes we have in these games. The rhythmization or the structure, of course, is more dense than in a natural landscape, but you also have this idea of mountaintops or hilltops and valleys that are structured by the streets and the rows of houses and things like this. And of course, the Bell's house. And also an interesting thing, maybe as a last point, that even if you are in these landscapes, there you have a lot of, so these open world games have to be a circulation space because you have always go from one point to another, and there are a lot of places you have to visit repeatedly. And the game designers often use network pathways, and they love to design bifurcations that have different atmosphere with them. So for example, with The Witcher 3, which is not a historical game per se, it's a dark fantasy game, but plays in, so to speak, Middle European, Middle Ages. You have always these bifurcations of a bigger path and a smaller path, and most of the time one of the path shows you a more bright atmosphere, a more light atmosphere, and the other path shows you a more dark, brooding atmosphere. So that it would say, "Come here to me," like in the second image on the left with this hut. "Come here to me." Maybe you find something here in the hut to loot, or maybe there's some monster to fight with, or things like this. So this idea of designing these pathways is really interesting, and this brought me back to English landscape gardens, because back in the days when they designed English landscape gardens, they not only used also this idea of what I call the prospect pacing, so that you have these undulating landscapes and you have always these vantage points to look into other points of interest and then decide where to go. But they also used the circulation space and the idea of bifurcations that also mediate or communicate different atmospheres, so to speak. But that's not the only point. The other point is that English landscape gardens also used a modular design system, which is really interesting because of of course, games are designed in a modular way because algorithms and databases function like that, right? And if you design an asset for a game world, the more you can use it within the game world, the better it is because of the data streaming economies and things like this. And with that, the other interesting thing was that a lot of iconic geological formations are used. So, of course, when you play something like Assassin's Creed Origin, you are in ancient Egypt, and there are, of course, a lot of places and a lot of types of deserts you can adapt into the game world. And that is the same with other games. Interestingly, when you look at games that play in our days or at post-apocalyptic cli-fi games, they use a lot of US national parks as iconic places, like I said before, with Horizon, which uses a lot of Colorado and Utah and California and things like this. And the one other interesting thing with this is that you there have a lot of logics that are used in structuring national park architecture, because also national parks are designed in the way where is the best vantage points for the people to go and how can we bring them there, because back in the days, in the 40s and 50s, they planned them in a way so that you could drive by car up to the vantage points and you don't have to hike there or things like this, you know. And with this idea in mind, it's really interesting to look back at these open world games and how they try to structure these vantage points in order to give the player an indirect hand and show him where to go, even if there is no quest they follow. And the other thing, maybe as a last point really now, is that they use landscapes in a distilled way. So of course you don't have these stretches of way the real, physical real places would have. Just one example here with Horizon Forbidden West, where you stay on the rim of the Yosemite Valley, which is one of the most iconic national parks in the world. And you can see El Capitan, the mountain, which you of course can scale. And up on the mountaintop, there's of course a really important crystal you can gather in order to upgrade your stuff. But you also can see on the horizon the pillars of the Golden Gate Bridge, which of course in reality is impossible because there are thousands of kilometers between them and a lot of other mountain ridges in between them. But in this way, they try to design these lines of sight in order to give you other points of interest in a whole other place of the game world, right? So this empowerment via vantage points, this empowerment via prospect pacing is a really important thing for these open world games. And it doesn't matter if they are in a natural landscape, like here with Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where you can see into a distilled version of ancient Greece, and you can also look onto most islands of the Aegeus, but it's also in urban open world games the case. And besides that, you have a lot of icons in world maps that try to steer you and try to give you a hand, but they are also limiting your experience or your exploration of the world, because these icons take away the free exploration from you, but that is another topic, maybe for later.
Okay, so thank you, Marc. Well, we've already seen some screenshots of Assassin's Creed Odyssey and I think Unity as well. And of course, at Ubisoft, they have been published. And at Ubisoft, you have a lot of experience handling open world games, but also working on cross-sections between games and cultural spheres. So for instance, you can already see it, Ubisoft developed Lady Sapiens, which is an immersive VR experience following a Paleolithic huntress. Deborah, what makes this special to be immersed into history with the help of open world games or open world spaces?
Well, the advantage is that open worlds has just like endless possibilities. It's not a narrow path. You can go everywhere. So for us, when we want to do things with other fields like culture, museums or documentaries, for instance, we can repurpose the content and tell a complete different stories just using that virtual world that we have. So it's more than just images. It's a complete virtual world in 3D that we can play with. It's a playground completely. So what happens with Lady Sapiens at the beginning, it's a documentary. So the idea by a French producer went to see France Télévisions, so our national TV, and said, it was 98, so like the Me Too period, and they presented the documentary, the idea to do a documentary about the role of women during prehistory, which was, so prehistory was studied in the 19th century, mainly by male historians who just copied their vision of the society that they had in the 19th century onto prehistory. But today, scientific discoveries show that that was not the reality. The reality was that the prehistory was more organized in terms of capacity, and women played a very big role. They had no more than 5 or 6 kids. They were very active. They were painting. They were bringing in about 70% of the resources of the household. So, and this is based on scientific discoveries. They wanted to do a good documentary, but France Télévisions says, we love the idea, Me Too at Paleolithic time, we love it. But how are you going to illustrate this documentary? If you only show a few trees, a few bones, and people wearing blouses, it's not going to be very appealing for a prime time documentary. One of the co-scénaristes, his name is Jacques Malater, he said, I know where to find images. He was a counselor, an expert on Assassin's Creed Far Cry. So, I mean, not sorry, on Far Cry Primal. So instead of having images from the usual like the films, etc., that show a woman that is weak or submissive, he said, in Far Cry Primal, you have something that is much closer than the reality. You have men and women who play an active role in the society, take care of the family, go hunting, etc. And so what we did is we didn't do the documentary. They're doing the documentary. It's a co-production with France Télévisions, with Ideocom in Canada, etc. They're doing the documentary. All we did is we let them access a build of the game that has a specific camera, and one of the technicians at Ubisoft worked with the filmmaker to film whatever he wanted. So they filmed for like 10 days in a row, 8 hours per day, to have rushes the same exact way they would do in a real world. They had all this rush, and then they could create the film. In the end, on the 90-minute documentary, there are 17 minutes of Far Cry. You know the cost of creating CGI 3D images from scratch? 150,000 euros a minute? Okay, there's no way a documentary can pay that price, obviously. But because of the fact that in games, the images are already created for the economy of the games, when we reuse these images, we film them, so there's of course a cost, and also there's a value to these images, but we can then adapt to the economy of the documentary. I'm just going to show you the introduction of the documentary so that you see the type of images that we get.
Les femmes sont les grandes absentes du livre de la préhistoire, les oubliées du récit de nos origines, comme si leur héritage s'était évanoui dans le temps, comme si leur rôle avait si peu compté dans notre évolution. Qui étaient vraiment ces femmes des temps anciens? Étaient-elles faibles et sans défense? Soumises aux chasseurs tout-puissants? Mères nourricières accaparées par leurs nombreux enfants? Leur rang a longtemps été sous-estimé dans l'histoire de notre espèce. Pourtant, sans elles, il n'y aurait pas d'humanité. Il est temps de rouvrir le livre de la préhistoire pour révéler le véritable visage de Lady Sapiens.
And the beauty of that is that we didn't need a coder to do that. It was just a technician who can use the in-game camera that works a little bit like a drone to film inside this virtual world. And then, so the success was huge. The viewership was twice of what they usually have on that science slot on TV. And then worldwide distribution, and then it was shown several times. They even did a version for kids where they cut the documentaries in 6 pieces of 7 minutes, each one with a theme, the same images with a different speech to tell a story that's more adapted to the kids' focusing on the woman artist, the woman huntress, the woman mother, etc. Then we decided to go one step further in immersion and decided to go and develop a virtual reality experience. Here we cannot film, obviously. You cannot film 2D and suddenly turn that into 360 experience. It's not possible. So what happened is in my team, I have a small development team, very talented, and they know how to pull out assets from the games. So they pulled out characters, trees, all kinds of artifacts and animals, etc. And from there, they created a virtual reality experience. It's 12 minutes, and you're in the shoes of Lady Sapiens. And here, you communicate. I'm just going to show you a few images, but you know, like when you VR, when you put it back on a flat screen, doesn't look like anything, but you're going to, at least you understand what it is. So you are Lady Sapiens, you look at yourself, even, it's your own reflection here. You understand that you're wounded, you exchange with someone whose language you don't even know, and you understand that she's going to help you heal your hand, and she's going to take you to the cave, and you learn how, you can actually draw. We all dreamt of drawing in a cave, so you actually can do it. You draw whatever you want. Then you go carve your weapons, and you end up just killing the mammoth. And it's fun.
Sounds like it, yeah.
And this was, for a year, it was, for example, at the National History Museum in Paris. It's also in a Paleolithic site in the southwest of France, called Saint-Césaire, where they loved it so much that they even contributed financially to the development of the experience. And all that is only possible if we have all the experts that also help you, because help us develop the games, develop the experience, because when you want to do a game, that's one thing, but when you want to work with documentaries or museum, you have to be careful of what is accurate, what is not, how you're going to tell the story. A small example, when we carve the weapons, you know, the silex, when you try to, you have a piece, you want to, whatever, carve your thing, okay? The weapons that they have to do that, the tools that they have were rather small to do that. The problem is when you give game controllers to someone to do that, the controller is rather big in VR. But if the controller is too small on the screen, they're going to go really close to each other. They're just going to break the controllers. So we asked the historian, is it okay, do you allow us to pretend that the tools were bigger, just so that the people, when they do the experience, they don't break the controller? And she said, yeah, I understand why you're asking me this. So yes, it's fine, you can do it. And so when we presented the experience to the head of the National History Museum in Paris, the head, he loved it. He killed the mammoths, had fun, he loved it. And he said, well, just show it to my scientific counselor to make sure that he validates. We showed that to him, and the guy goes, yes, interesting. I'm not sure about the color of the leaves on the tree. And then I'm not completely sure of the length of the hair of the mammoth. I was like, okay, that was 40,000 years ago. You were not born. I wasn't born either. We had a scientific counselor who's not from the museum. She's different, but she also gave us information. And what's important here is not that it's completely accurate. What we want is people to get interested. We want to create engagement so that people get interested in that story of what was the role of women. Some people are going to watch the documentary. Some people are going to read books. Some people are going to try the VR experience. What we want is just trigger interest and create engagement. And he said, okay, just put a warning at the very beginning that says it comes from the video game Far Cry from Primal from Ubisoft. I'm happy to advertise for my games, but I have no problem. And it worked really well. And then so it was so you see on the slide. And then the paleo site in the southwest of France also noticed the animals in Far Cry Primal. They loved the animals. They said, oh, wow, we wanted to do a new film, just like regular film, you know, those 12-minute films that you have in all the museums. But they had no money to create the film. It's like, is it possible to use Far Cry Primal to create an educational movie? And we said, why not? So the filmmaker of the documentary, who had played hours, like 100 hours of Far Cry Primal, knew exactly what was in the game. He created a story where
Mes
Pierrette,
muscles sont
you can
tétanisés.
lower the sound,
Mon
thank
sang
you.
est glacé.
Where Pierrette goes in the forest to find medical plants to heal her son who's sick. And as she walks, she's going to meet animals, and every time she meets an animal, there are going to be scientific information about the animals. So we go from an 18+ mature rated game, we end up with an educational movie. It's 12 minutes. It's showing that there. You can watch the whole thing later. It's on the screen right there. And again, that was entirely filmed inside Far Cry Primal without the help of any coder or graphist or anything. So that's the beauty, again, of open world where you can play and do whatever you want. The hard part for us was how do we control that character? So we told her, you're a companion. So this character, she's a non-playable character usually, but because she's controlled by AI, we told her, you're a companion, so you have to walk around to go and join your friends. And the other thing is, you're not, like, you're very nice, like, you don't want to fight. So when there's an animal that comes, you go away. You don't want to fight with the animal. The problem is when we did that, as we filmed many, many hours, she was getting killed by the animals all the time. So we had to find a way to just, like, avoid her to die. We killed a lot of Pierrettes, but in the end it worked.
Right, thank you. Well, we already heard some perks of experiencing history in a digital setting, and I would like just very shortly, so maybe 1 minute each or 2 minutes, what is, you think, the add-on of open world games in comparison to, for example, linear experiencing, closed world games, when it comes to exploring our past? And I'd like to start with you, Marc.
Well, the idea of the openness, of the non-linearity. Of course, these games are not endless or open in this specific word, but they give you the stage to do things you would like to do. You know, like I said prior, so you could just go hunting, or you could just sit on a mountaintop and watch the sun go up and down and look into the stars if you want, or you can just walk the rain coming. Or you could also go look at these animals that are going around the natural landscapes and just to see how they behave. And it, of course, depends on what the game designers programmed for their behavior. Because as you said earlier, most of these games are only programmed to either run away or attack the player. So there are not a lot of options given to interact with the games, with the animals. Except for some other games like Red Dead Redemption, where you have your horse and you have to comb it and you have to feed it so it gets stronger and things like this. But yeah, that's the very idea of giving this whole historical setting as a freely approachable setting is really interesting. Like a live-action museum, you know, like Gettysburg in the US. Where you can go to the historical city and you can experience everything by yourself. Could you give me the presenter, please? Sorry. So I could show also some.
That's why I kept it, because I knew it was me afterwards.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, when you especially look into Assassin's Creed, you could go to the French Revolution, Paris times, or you could go to ancient Egypt and you could meet Cleopatra, for example. But you also could just stay on the mountaintop and see the sun setting, or you could climb the pyramids of Gizeh. And one or two interesting things with these games is, of course, not only that you can approach these historical spaces by your own pacing and by your own likeness, but if you go into the quests, you also may be confronted with specific topics, like, for example, with Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which is in Victorian-era London, you are confronted with child labor. And this is embodied in the game world by certain quest places, by certain factories, where you have to free all these children by sneaking into these factories and I think it was killing the overseer or something like this. I can't recall it, as I have to say. But then again, you can stay away from it, maybe make it later, or if it is an optional quest, you can avoid it and you don't have to do it, and you just climb the Big Ben and watch the whole city and all the smokes coming around from the industrialization era. And yeah, that's it.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess what the difference between linear games and open world is that Marc and Nora are not going to have the same experience in the game. So the following day, when they talk about it, they can really talk about it. It's not like when you see a TV series and have you seen episode 23 of season 4? Yes, I've seen it. Okay, and you can comment on what you've seen, but here you can bring in something new because everybody has experienced something different. And in the future, where today the interaction with the non-playable characters is very limited and very scripted, tomorrow we're going to be able to offer experiences that are much deeper and much more personalized and very different from one player to the other.
Mm-hmm. Well, talking about length of mammoth hair, as Rodi said, our next topic is reconstruction versus free interpretation. And of course, there's the question, and I'd like to ask you, Deborah, how important is it to stay close to the historical material, to official records, or is it more important to enhancing the individual experience of the person experiencing this historical setting?
Well, first, it's important when you want to do a historical video game. It's still a fiction, but you need to know what you're talking about. So we always start studying, learning, so books, internet, etc. We also work with experts, so it can be academics, so universities and stuff, but also community experts. For example, a game about the American Revolution, we want to talk to the Native Americans. Also go very much in detail, the weapon detail. So this guy, for example, is a specialist of the weapons of the American Revolution. And sometimes also history fans. So the people, for example, who are enacting battles, these guys, they know exactly where the buttons are on the vest because they have to close the vest in order to reenact the battle. So when we talk to them, it's much more efficient for us than just seeing paintings or anything like that. So it's very interesting, and sometimes they're even more knowledgeable than the academics, but don't tell the academics. We also recreate maps, so these are based on old maps or sometimes even more recent things. For example, think Egypt. For Assassin's Creed Origin, it's about the era, it's rather late actually, it's Ptolemy the 13th, but we identified 4 areas in Egypt that were very interesting for our games, but they're rather far away. And at that time, there was no plane, obviously, so you could go by horse, by boat to different places, or just walk, or a camel maybe. So what we did is we identified the different places, and we create a map that is shrinked. We shrink it so that it stays interesting for the players. We always have to keep in mind and balance between recreating the reality and keeping the interest for the player to preserve the gameplay. Same thing, we recreate the monument. So this is just, I love this because it's a player who played Assassin's Creed Unity, so that's Paris during the French Revolution. He took screenshot, printed the screenshot, and then he walks around Paris and takes another picture and say, hey, look, it's exactly the same building. So it's fun. It's very important to recreate living world. We're not trying to do digital twins. That's not us. That's not video games. It's not interesting to do digital twins. And by the way, there are going to be many tools in the future to recreate digital twins. That's it. Okay. What's important is where you're going to live. How this place becomes immersive, and it becomes immersive because it's a living world. So here you have the streets in Paris with all the noise in Paris and the different jobs. So to create this with all these people you probably don't even interact with, and that's fine. Just walk around and they're around you. The same way in a film you have those people who don't speak, and that's it. They're just here to populate the world. And for this, we get inspiration from old books, etc. And when you leave this scene in Assassin's Creed Unity, there is the noise, there is the people, the colors, everything. The only thing that's missing here is probably the smell, which is probably for the better. We also, for example, take things from museums. So these are statues from the Louvre, from Egypt, and they show how they were making bread or how they were brewing beer. And the experts are explaining to us That's how they were doing. So then our artists can recreate the scene, and these are scenes that are just here to populate. You don't even interact with the people who are making bread, etc. They're just here as you wander around. And our job is then to fill in the blanks, and that's where it's fun. When you know history, there are some things that you know happened, and there are some things that no one knows. And that's where we can tell a different story, and that's where we can have our character or Assassin's Creed go and meet with real characters that existed, for example, real monuments. And sometimes you have monuments, for example, that you have no idea how they were destroyed. The only thing that the historians can tell us is that in 1793, this building was on fire and was destroyed. Who set the fire? We don't know. Okay. That's fun. We can invent a story here where the assassin was followed by someone, they fought, blah, 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 and then there was the fire. So that's what's fun. That's what we're doing. Again, our next game is Assassin's Creed Shadows about feudal Japan. You have until February. It was just pushed a little bit by a few months to polish it. And we chose to have a black samurai. So someone who came from Africa and who was a samurai in Japan. This is a historical character that existed for real. Like history tells us he existed. The problem is we don't know much about him. That's fantastic for us. There are plenty of blank pieces and we can tell the story that we want. And for that, we also work with experts, etc. So the idea again is to create emotion. So to illustrate this, I like this picture. These are exactly the same place. It's the fortress, the Sudak fortress. It's in Crimea. On the left, you can see a touristic picture from the 90s. It's not a professional picture, it's a touristic picture. It doesn't tell much. And on the right, you can see a painting. And you can see that the painting is not as accurate. It's inspired by reality. But it tells a story, where the photograph doesn't tell a story. What we want to do is create worlds that tell a story, where there's drama, where people want to know and want to progress in the world. So I think that's a good way to understand the difference. And what we also try to do always is to create illusion. So we recreate the things, or we show on screen the things that the people are seeing. For example, you see a character with a dress, you're going to see the front of the dress. We don't need to animate the back of the dress. But if she turns, then we're going to animate the back of the dress. Same thing. So what we show on screen, we have to balance also between what the person is going to see and the accuracy and all the details and what the processors can show. Because if we use all the power of the processor to show all the details, there's no power left to move your character in the game, and then, well, it's not a game anymore. So here, we also create the illusion. Sometimes we need to go a bit fast because there are so many things that we need to represent. So on this, we can use Mentimeter?
Yes,
or?
I think we have to...
oh, we don't want to do it? Okay.
We don't have
up to you.
much time.
So just think for yourself. One of them is a picture taken in the Sainte-Chapelle, and the other one is from the game Assassin's Creed. If I don't have time, so you choose for yourself what you think, and I just give the answer?
Yes.
Answer? Okay. So actually, the church is on the left, and the game is on the right, and you can see that the stained glass, on the right, it's the same motif that we reproduce. We don't need to bother and go and do something too detailed on the stained glass. And the other thing that you see is that on the top left corner, there's a pole like this. And you don't really see it. It's hidden in the architecture, but that's just so that the assassins can climb.
So to still have some time for the Q&As at the end, I would suggest that we skip forward to the third block. Yes. All right. So, okay. There we go. Okay. So the last topic we have is the meaning of participation and interaction for user experience, and so it's about the idea that usually, right, the past is seen as something which is finished and unmovable, right? And this is completely changed in open world games as we've seen it already. And I would like to start up the discussion with both of you to finish up. How is our idea of history being transformed through the possibilities we have seen of user-driven interaction with the past in open world games? And what is the impact of this kind of digital historical open world on our experiences and also, of course, on our individual and collective memories as societies or as individuals? Marc, would you say? Begin. And yeah, let's keep it maybe really short.
Well, I mean, open world games are like movie blockbusters, right? So they cost mostly between 100 and 300 million dollars to produce. So they are really big. And of course, there is a certain impact connected with them. And the first thing, maybe first, no computer game is not political. So there is not a computer game that is not political in any kind of way. If you use certain systems of science, or if you, I mean, when you depict the human culture, it is full with semiotics. It's full with science systems. And all these science systems, doesn't matter how they are connected, communicate something political in any way possible. So, of course, there are a lot of politics going in there, even if a lot of game designers say that their games are not political, they are political. For example, you could go to the Division, to the Division game, which is also made by Ubisoft from a Swedish development team, where you could see in the cover when it was presented for the first time, you could see a female warrior with an M4 assault rifle standing in the front of the cover and looking on the Capitol in Washington, and the Capitol was burning. So, and it came out in 2017 or 2016. And of course, something like this is political, right? And if you look back at when Biden won the election, you all maybe remember what happened back then. The Trump fans stormed the Capitol. So it is not that far off from real-world politics when we have such games. So this is a really interesting thing, and these impacts are massive. For example, like you said before with the black male samurai, which was there in history, but is not clear in which role, or if he was really accounted as a samurai by the Japanese officials and things like this. And all the fans of Assassin's Creed start a big shitstorm, because why is he not a Japanese guy? Does it have to be a black guy? And then you can also play a female ninja warrior, which is also difficult, because for one, it's a female ninja, which is also, the players would say there's no female ninja, but as we also got to know in the Paleolithic time, or also with the Viking warriors, there were a lot of female warriors or a lot of female hunters back in these days, but it's not that documented, or it is not that researched. So there are a lot of things going on with these open world games, as they are mass media and as they are really big blockbusters in popular culture, and they have a really big impact for the good and the better. So, yeah.
Okay, so thank you. Last question to you, Deborah. What do you think, what is the future potential of open world games in the context of historical settings?
Well, I have to pronounce the word artificial intelligence. So obviously, we're using, or we will use artificial intelligence to improve the games, to improve the productivity, etc. But I guess everybody's doing that. What's interesting is how we embrace the technology to do things that were not possible in our games before. And to that effect, we actually showed a prototype back in February at the Game Developers Conference, which is one of the biggest trade shows in video games, professional show. We showed a prototype where you can actually engage in a conversation with a non-playable character. So today in games, you have non-playable character, but it's very scripted. When you go and talk to them, their dialogue is extremely scripted, and all you want is to know where is the house of George. And he gives you the information, and that's it. And you probably never going to meet that guy again, because he only had 3 lines of dialogue anyway, so there's no point in meeting him again. In the future, these non-playable characters, not the ones who are making bread, but the one that you can actually talk to, is going to be powered by an artificial intelligence. And the scenarist at Ubisoft is not going to write just 3 lines, but he's going to write his whole history, his legend, who is he? Like, who is he married to? How many kids they have? Why did he kill the lover of his wife? How many years did he spend in prison? What does he like to eat? Whatever, like the whole backstory of that character. So as a player, when I come and talk to him, I can engage in any conversation the same way I would do with a real character. So it's like turning any game into a multiplayer game where almost like if there was a human person behind every character in the game. And also we can train them to be more empathic or be more directive or be more open to your suggestions. For example, someone's going to tell you, okay, you have to take the stairs to go to that room and kill that bad guy there. And then I can say, oh yeah, but I see there's a tree here. And maybe I could just take something and go on the tree and go through the window. And she can say, oh yes, yeah, that's a good plan. And then you can do that. So you can even she can give you missions and then discuss the missions with you, etc. And adapt to your gameplay style. When you come back, she can also react to the environment. And these characters can also be trained to not give you the information too early. So when you can say, where's the house of George? That's not what you're going to say in real life. Like, if I talk to any of you, I'm not going to go straight and ask you a question. I'm going to try to get to know you, try to install trust between us, and then little by little, I can have you, I can ask you more precise questions and get my thing. It's going to be the same thing in video games. And the prototypes is also already very impressive. And the good thing is that it's not a tool created by engineers and given to the scenarist. The tool is created by interdisciplinary teams. And the philosophy of AI at Ubisoft is create tools to help the creator and not the creation. So really think about the people and create the tools with them, for them, because our talents are our biggest resource. And we need to preserve the talents and make their job more interesting. And of course, with AI, some jobs are probably going to change. And it's okay if the people are involved in these changes.
Okay, so before we close and go to your questions, let's just revisit for a second the Mentimeter we started at the beginning. Can we do that and show up the answer you gave? Remember, the question was, what was your personal experience in? Right, there we are. Oh, there was, okay, Assassin's Creed in the very center. So everybody, or mostly everybody, is somehow accustomed to an Assassin's Creed experience. And I think, yes, Notre Dame, also Assassin's Creed Red Dead Redemption, Alan Wake 2, interesting, okay. So there is some experience in open world games, I think. And I think there's a grand future ahead as well. And well, thank you both very, very much for the insights. And let's have your questions. Yes.
So thank you very much for this panel. And my question is regarding the opportunity of exploration and frustration in open world games. For example, we have games that really give you any waypoint you want and you really know where to go, which can lead to frustration because they do not explore. And then there is the extreme other side that you, like Elden Ring, you don't know anything. It's not historical, but Elden Ring doesn't give you any clue. You have to explore everything on your own. So my question is, what is the line between frustration and exploration? Because the gamers or the mass gamers are like people working from 9 to 5. They just want to get on the computer and play for 1 or 2 hours, 3 hours, then get to bed. Next day the same. But sorry, but they want an experience, an adventure, and at the same time they don't want to get frustrated. So my question is, for the future, what is the line between frustration and the exploration?
Well, I mean, you addressing the Ubisoft formula, right? Which was called that way by journalists, that you have too much icons and the whole idea of exploration was taken away from the player. with a lot of games, not only the Ubisoft open world games, but with most of all the other open world games, up to a point where Zelda Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring, which you mentioned, came to the plate. And of course, the line, I mean, the ideal line would be in between those two, right? Between something like Assassin's Creed Odyssey and something like Elden Ring. To give the players maybe the options to scale all these things to their liking, right? So, like, for example, is something in the level structure highlighted that I can climb up, or that I can open, or that I can interact with? So a lot of things are highlighted in that way, so that you're completely bombarded the whole time by things that that can be looted or gathered or things like this, which I just had in this picture here earlier with Horizon Zero Dawn. And a lot of games use this idea of projecting these interaction things in the interface, right? Where you can see what type of plant you can gather, where is the next fireplace to save your game, or where's the next point to go at, and how many steps is it away, and things like this. So it's all like an augmented reality navigation system within these games. And Elden Ring does the complete opposite thing with saying nothing or telling almost nothing, and also showing nothing in the interface, which is, of course, in the sense for an open world game, pretty interesting, because there you have this real idea of what the trappers back in the days when they colonized the North American expanse, or Australian expanse, for that example, would be the definition of the idea of exploration and the wonder you could make. And I think the next step would be to find a middle way. And of course, some of these Ubisoft games also did this. For example, when Far Cry 3 and 4 had a lot of towers you had to climb in order to have the regions of the game world activated, so you could see the points of interest. Those towers were neglected with Far Cry 5, for example. And in Far Cry 6, you also don't have these types of topoids of open world level design. So yeah, and there are a lot of things that are scaled back, because they see that Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring have such a big impact right now and such a big fan base. So there's maybe the next few games will also scale back in the direction of these games, but of course not in the sense of a From Software game world.
Thank you.
Because it's not much.
Do we still have time for? Okay, for Deborah. One question for Deborah, maybe? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question and I have the microphone. I actually have two questions. The first one is, where's George's house, of course? And the second question is, I think it's really interesting that you work a lot with this cooperation with public institutions, with museums, with academics. And I want to ask how difficult it is, because probably they have different perspective on things. I mean, the museum is probably more focused on the accuracy of information, while other people may be in the experience and so on. So you have to deal with conflicts between different communities, and maybe different communities have different historical point of views, or there is dispute. How hard that is? And the second and the other question will be, how in AAA games companies, how much do you think that's a thing of Ubisoft focus or obsessed with doing this job, or it's a thing that in the whole industry it's common?
Okay. So first I'm going to answer your second question. We're very lucky to have the Assassin's Creed brand that we created that travels across 2,500 years of history. So we have so many games that are historical that we're in a very good position. The other thing is Ubisoft's mission is to enrich players' life. And by enrich, you can put many things in enrich. It can be gain confidence, it can be just play with friends, it can be many things. It can be also learn. And it's very deeply rooted in the company that we want to do something good also for the society. So when I proposed to the CEO that I do that, I just said, I'm going to do it in a way that's not going to cost anything to the company. My the name of my department is New Business. It has the word business. So the promise that I made is we're going to find a way to do that in a way where we're going to have the museums and the documentaries pay for our work, and it's not going to be a burden on Ubisoft. So I said, okay, try. We've done that for 8 years, so we're good. So the other companies, this is a business that is extremely small. It's just a few millions in a company that does 2 billion. So it's like a drop of water. It's nothing. So most companies are just not going to want, like, who cares that we do that? Like, what's the impact financially? Ubisoft is a bit different. It's like there's the financial impact and there's a bit more than that. So we're very lucky to be in that company. That's the thing. The other thing is working with museums and documentaries, it's a question of people. It's meeting people, and suddenly the head of the Château de Versailles tells me, oh, how come we don't work together? Like, yeah, let's do it. And our team were actually talking together already and wanted to do some projects, but they didn't have that green light from the top. And suddenly, when the head says, how come you don't work with Ubisoft? It's like, we're just waiting for the green light. And then we go and we can invent things that are completely crazy, etc. But it's a question of openness of the people we're talking to. We're also in a position where we're lucky because our counterparts in the traditional culture world are also people who are between 40, 50, or people who have kids, or people who were gamers, even if they were not gamers anymore, so who are more open maybe than the previous generation. So that's also another thing. And sometimes we're in front of people who are completely reluctant to working with games. We don't waste our time. We go and talk to other people who are more open. I mean, at one point you have to choose. But when the people are motivated, it's actually very easy. And Amy is also going to do, Amy's in my team, I don't know where she is. She's right here. And she's going to have a workshop tomorrow where she's going to go deeper into details about what she does with museums. She's creating things that are completely incredible, like traditional exhibition at the Arab World Institute in Paris with like real objects, or creating a museum about the life at the Viking Age in Winchester with the city of Winchester, financed by the city of Winchester, and all the content comes from Assassin's Creed. And still, it's like all the academic world and the cultural world at large, more and more understand the value of creating engagement via our content, if it's not 100% accurate.
Right, so we have time for one more question, and the rest I think is going to be answered out over dinner. Yes, please.
Yes, a question.
I think we need the mic.
Oh,
yeah.
sorry. Deborah, one thing that struck me because we're talking about open worlds, and I think they're open mostly to gamers right now. And you started by saying you're not a gamer. Do you feel that, I mean, in the game industry as a whole is also seeing a contraction right now, and there's a certain flattening and a certain roof that we've perhaps reached in terms of the gamers, so to speak, that we're reaching. Do you feel that in order to make the world at large more open and games more open, they need to become less specialized and be less for gamers?
There's a strong possibility that we're going to need to be able to provide more assistance to the newbies. And actually, there are games that already do that. Because when you're a newcomer to a game, you can't really find anyone to play with because you're not good. So it's like playing tennis with Federer. It's like not possible. He's not going to be interested. And you're going to be losing, like not marking 1 point. So it's not interesting. So there are ways with, again, using technical tools to make it easier for the people who are newbies to navigate and for them to have some kind of advantage so that it becomes interesting for them and for the people who are more experienced. And I think that's most gaming companies are working on these tools right now.
Right, so thank you again, Deborah Papiernik and Marc Bonner. Thank you for participating, and let's have dinner.